Good evening, dear students. Hope all of you are staying safe and doing good. So, we'll begin with the next protozoan disease today, that is malaria. As with the other diseases we have discussed, we'll be discussing the brief background about that particular disease, classification, the structure of that particular causative organism, cultural characteristics, pathogenicity, pathogenesis, symptoms, diagnosis, epidemiology, prophylaxis, and treatment. So this protozoan disease, malaria, is caused by the protozoa of the genus Plasmodium. So the parasites are spread. These parasites are spread to people or to humans through the bites of infected female Anopheles mosquito. So these mosquitoes are referred to as malaria vectors. There are 4 species of these Plasmodium that cause disease in humans or that cause malaria in humans. So these 4 species are Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale, and Plasmodium malariae. So other species of Plasmodia are also exist, but these other species infect reptiles, birds, and other mammals apart from humans. So the ones that infect humans are these 4 species. So coming to the classification, there are 4 species as we discussed. So these 4 species are also, all the 4 species are responsible for causing malaria in humans, but the intensity with which each species cause malaria varies. So Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium falciparum accounts for vast majority of the cases, and among that again Plasmodium falciparum causes the most severe disease. So the malaria caused by Plasmodium falciparum can lead to serious conditions or severity in the malarial symptoms. Next, looking at the structure of this protozoan. So as with amoebiasis we have seen with Entamoeba histolytica, there also it has many stages or many cysts or many different cell forms during the life cycle of these protozoans. Similarly, here in case of Plasmodium as well, there are basically 2 distinct types of cysts that are formed, or 2 distinct types of forms that are seen in case of Plasmodium genus. Okay, so the first one is the parasite in its mature adult condition, which is called as the trophozoite. So the trophozoite is amoeboid, it is uninucleated, and it contains vacuole, and also it has a granular cytoplasm. So when we look at the ultrastructure of this trophozoite as seen by electron microscopy, we can see that this plasmodium in an RBC possesses a double membraned plasma lemma. So you can see the structure as and when I am explaining about the different organelles, you can just see how the structure looks. Okay. And the cytoplasm contains small dense particles containing ribonucleoproteins. This dense body, whatever you see here, are the particles that contain ribonucleoproteins. The endoplasmic reticulum, what you see here as smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So this endoplasmic reticulum is not well developed and it simply appears as a vesicle, and the shape of these vesicles can vary. So the vesicles can be either they are smooth or rough surfaced, and they are loosely scattered all over the cytoplasm. So the next structure is the mitochondria. So here the pink colored, whatever you see here, these are the mitochondria. They possess double membrane and show peripheral cristae, and they have a structureless central region. So the number of mitochondria that are present varies with the age. In the Merozoic stage, we'll see what is that Merozoic stage in the later slides. So that particular Merozoic stage has only one mitochondrion, whereas in this Trophozoic stage, there are several mitochondria. And the Golgi apparatus, whatever you see here, the small pink colored vesicles, it is composed of small vesicles that are arranged either in rows or they are very loosely, not completely loosely scattered, slightly scattered. And the concentric body originates from the plasma lemma. So this pink colored, whatever you're seeing at the end of the cell, so that is the concentric body that originates from the plasma lemma and serves the function of mitochondria in these, as in this trophozoites. And there are also the membrane vacuoles that are present with structureless matrix, and they occur in the cytoplasm. So apart from this, what all we see here? Nucleus. The nucleus is large and its nucleoplasm is composed of granular and fine fibrillar material. The nuclear membrane that surrounds the nucleus is a double layered, to which RNA particles are attached. So the nucleolus lies centrally in the nucleus. Okay, and there are also the pinocytosis vacuoles that are common in the cytoplasm, and these pinocytosis vacuoles, what you see here as vacuole, they serve as food vacuoles. They help in storing the food. And the food vacuoles may also contain hemozoin depending upon the species of Plasmodium. I'll tell you what is hemozoin in the later slides. The mode of nutrition in case of these trophozoites is saprozoic, and it occurs by osmotrophy. So the organ of locomotion is not found in these trophozoites or in Plasmodium, and the respiration occurs anaerobically. And when we look at the reproduction, it has both sexual and asexual phases in their life cycle of reproduction. So next structure what we see is that of the sporozoid. So this sporozoid is the stage when the mosquito bites humans and inserts the plasmodium into the human blood. This is the stage which is being injected into the human blood. So this sporozoid stage has a sickle-shaped body, and it is covered externally by an elastic, firm pellicle having longitudinally arranged contractile microtubules. So these microtubules help in the gliding movement as shown by the sporozoids. So whatever microtubules you see here at the tip of the sporozoid, so these microtubules are nothing but motility associated proteins. So these microtubules are structural proteins, and they are basically involved in the function of motility or movement of these protozoans, or for that matter any microorganisms. So its anterior end bears an apical cup. So this apical cup, whatever you see here, and it is made up of 3 or more concentric rings. So this concentric rings help in the when these rings rotate over the sporozoid, it will propel the sporozoid forward. Nucleus it has a single nucleus and vesicular, and it is having a nucleolus in the center. And this sporozoid has a single mitochondrion, and it has large number of convoluted tubules. The function of these convoluted tubules is not completely known. So this is about the two basic or two distinct forms of the plasmodium. So next we'll look at the cultural characteristics or how these plasmodium can be cultured. So this plasmodium can be cultured by a unique method, or it is called as ex vivo culture. So ex vivo culture is providing same conditions or duplicating the conditions as that of the host, or what to say, it is exactly similar to the conditions that are happening in the host but in the external environment. So that is what is referred to as ex vivo culture. And this culture is it is used for the culturing of malarial parasites, that is plasmodium. So this first successful continuous culture of this plasmodium was established in the year 1976. So what was done in this method is infected human red blood cells with the plasmodium were incubated in a culture dish or a flask at 37 degrees centigrade along with nutrient medium and also with plasma or serum substitutes. So a special feature that was used for the incubation of these cultures was that a mixture of gases filled with nitrogen in the percentage of 90 to 92%, 5% carbon dioxide and 3 to 5% of oxygen was used, and it was allowing the parasites to grow at 37 degrees centigrade in a cell incubator. An alternative to using these gases was the use of candle jar. So what happens in this candle jar? It is an airtight container in which the cultures and a lit candle were placed. So the burning candle consumes some of the oxygen and then it gives out carbon dioxide. So this acts as a fire extinguisher. So the carbon dioxide content in the fresh air varies between 0.036% to 0.039%. So what happens within the candle jar? Once the carbon dioxide concentration reaches to approximately 5%, then the candle stops burning. So this is the optimum level of carbon dioxide required by the parasites for their growth. So then the number of parasites increase by a factor of 5, and this happens every 48 hours. So this is referred to as one cycle. So this is how the parasites, especially the plasmodium, are cultured. Okay, so next we will see about the pathogenicity of plasmodium. So in pathogenicity, we will be looking at the life cycle of Plasmodium vivax. So as you might be knowing, the life cycle of Plasmodium happens in both man as well as in mosquito. So it has two different phases in its life cycle. So one is the asexual phase and the other is the sexual phase. So this, since it is having a life cycle in two hosts, it is referred to as digenetic. Okay, and the asexual phase of the life cycle of this plasmodium is completed in man by a process called as schizogony. Okay, and the sexual phase of its life cycle is completed in the female Anopheles mosquito by three processes, namely gametogony, syngamy, and sporogony. Okay, so we will look at these two life cycles and we will see what are the different stages of cells that develop or cysts that develop in case of the life cycle of Plasmodium. So as and when I represent the different processes, you can see the diagram and you can make out with the and you can correlate with the explanation. So the first step is the inoculation. So what happens when an infected female Anopheles mosquito that is carrying this Plasmodium bites a man to suck his blood, then it will inject the sporozoid stage of the Plasmodium along with the saliva, along with its saliva into the human blood. Okay. So this mosquito, when it injects or inoculates the sporozoids, it inoculates about thousands of sporozoids into the human blood. Okay, so then these sporozoids have a mild slight gliding movement. So with this gliding movement, they travel through the bloodstream and they enter the site of infection, that is the parenchymatous cells of the liver. So where they will undergo two schizogonic cycles. So what happens in these schizogonic cycles? They will be developing to the next stage of their cells. Okay. So what happens in the liver? We will see. So the second step is the schizogony in liver cells. So okay. So these steps, what we are seeing now is the asexual cycle of Plasmodium that is happening in the man. Okay. So what happens in schizogony in liver cells? The sporozoids grow and they form a large rounded schizont. Okay, so this schizont divides by multiple fission to form a spindle shaped cell which is called as merozoite. Okay, so this multiple fission wherein the sporozoid changes or emerges into a merozoite, this stage is referred to as, or this is referred to as schizogony. Okay. Then the schizont ruptures and the merozoites are liberated into the sinusoids or venous passages of the liver. So these merozoites, they will be liberated into the venous passage of the liver. Okay. So this is the second step. So what happens in the third step? So this is the third stage is actually a representation which is referred to as pre-patent and incubation period. So what is this pre-patent and incubation period? It is the duration between the initial sporozoid infection, that is when the mosquito injects the Plasmodium, and the first appearance of this parasite in the blood. Okay, so this is what is, so this whole thing until it appears in the blood, it is referred to as the pre-patent and incubation period. So which happens for about 8 days on an average. So the next step is schizogony in the erythrocytes. So this schizogony, whatever you have seen in the liver, the same schizogony happens in the erythrocyte, but with a different intermediate that develops between the sporozoid and the merozoid. Okay. So here what happens in the erythrocyte? A third multiplication phase of schizogony happens, and which is known as erythrocytic schizogony. Since it is happening in the erythrocytes, it is known as erythrocytic schizogony. And these merozoites, whatever are present, they will emerge into a signet ring shaped trophozoite. Okay, so whatever you're seeing here, the trophozoite stage is what it emerges. Okay, sorry. So first it emerges into a signet ring shaped trophozoite. So this ring, whatever you're seeing here, so that is what is the stage we are referring to. Phase. Okay. So this signet ring, why does it develop? It develops as a result of these merozoites when they feed on the erythrocytes, and in turn it develops a vacuole in the cell. Okay. So to store these food debris, they develop a vacuole inside the merozoite, and hence the what happens, the nucleus gets pushed to one side of the cell. So this, since the nucleus is getting pushed to one side of the cell, it forms a signet ring shape. So this is referred to as signet ring shaped trophozoite. Okay, the trophozoite, further what happens, it grows to become rounded and amoeboid, and it develops to what is known as a scisont. Okay, so the development of this scisont stage of plasmodium is what is the whole cycle is referred to as schizogony. So this scisont, it has a yellowish brown pigment granules of hemozoin. So what we discussed in the structure, so what this granules of hemozoin, and it is these hemozoin granules are derived from the iron of hemoglobin that are present in the erythrocytes. Okay, so once these plasmodium draw all the iron of the hemoglobin present in the erythrocytes, they will form a granule with this iron, what is referred to as hemozoin, and it acquires granules, and these granules that are present in the scisont is called as Schaffner's dots. Okay, so the scisont, then further it undergoes multiple fission to form 12 to 24 oval shaped merozoites again. Okay, so the cycle keeps continuing. So this phase of asexual multiplication that happens in the erythrocytes is referred to as erythrocytic schizogony. Okay, so this is the fourth step. So the next step is, the fifth step is formation of the gametocytes. So in this step, what happens? So after many such generations of schizogony that happens in the blood, some of the merozoites, what they do, they get transformed into two types of gametocytes. Okay, so under favorable conditions. So these two types of gametocytes are called macrogametocytes and microgametocytes. Okay, so what are these macrogametocytes? These macrogametocytes are female and they are rounded with a food laden cytoplasm, and it has a small nucleus. Okay, so the macrogametocytes are the female and the microgametocytes are the male. So always with other organisms also, as you would have seen, the bigger structure or the macro one will be the egg and the micro will be the male gamete. Okay, we'll refer it as male and female gametes. The bigger one will be the female gamete and the smaller one will be the male gamete. So these microgametes, they have a clear cytoplasm and it will have a large central nucleus. So once these gametocytes develop, they will remain in the human blood itself for several weeks, because these gametocytes, if they have to begin the next life cycle in mosquito, they will have to be carried by the mosquito. So when can this happen? When the female Anopheles mosquito again bites the humans, then these plasmodium, especially the gametocytes of the plasmodium, will be carried by the mosquito, and it will start the sexual life cycle in the mosquito. If this does not happen, what happens? These gametocytes will degenerate and they die in the human host itself. So that is about the life cycle in man, that is the asexual cycle. Okay. So next we will see the sexual cycle or the life cycle that happens in the mosquito. So when does this happen? As I mentioned, when the gametocytes are sucked up along with the human blood by a female Anopheles mosquito, then they will reach the stomach, and the stomach of the mosquito where the gametocytes are set free. Okay. So in the mosquito, what happens? The first process is gametogony. So this gametogony is the first step. So the microgametes, once they are released in the stomach, they undergo a process what is called as exflagellation. So that is, they develop flagella-like structures because the male gamete has to travel through to the female gamete for fertilization to happen, isn't it? So what happens? These male gametes or microgametes undergoes a process called exflagellation, and the nucleus also divides into 6 to 8 haploid daughter nuclei, and these will migrate towards the periphery or the edge of the gametocytes. So then what happens? The cytoplasm pushes out forming long flagellum-like structures having one daughter nuclei each in each of the cell. Okay. So then these gametes separate and start moving actively in the stomach of the mosquito because they will have to reach the female gamete. So on the other hand, what happens? The macrogametes undergo maturation process and a female gamete or a macrogamete will be formed. So this female gamete is not motile and it develops a cytoplasmic or receptive cone. So this receptive cone or pore is responsible, or it is required for the entry of the male gamete or the microgamete. Okay. So then the next step is fertilization. So once the microgamete enters the macrogamete through the receptive cone, then fertilization is achieved by complete fusion of the nucleus and cytoplasm of both the gametes. So when the fusion occurs, then the fertilization has happened, and this fusion is referred to as syngamy. Syngamy is fusion of two gametes and results in the formation of a rounded zygote. Okay. So this is the second step. In the third step, what happens? That is ookinete and encystment. So this zygote that is formed will have to, what it does, it elongates to become a worm-like structure having pointed ends and it becomes motile. Okay. So then these zygotes that develops into a pointed structure are referred, or spindle-shaped structures or oval structures, these are referred to as ookinetes. Okay, sorry, they are referred to as ookinetes. So these ookinetes move and they bore or they drill through the wall of the stomach in the mosquito, and they lie beneath the outer epithelial layer. Okay. So further what happens? These ookinetes develop cyst within them, and this condition is called as, condition is referred to as the oocyst. So once these ookinetes develop a cyst, or when they undergo encystment, it is called as oocyst. So this oocyst then grows in size and it is also referred to as a sporont. Okay, so this oocyst develops. In the next step, what happens? The next stage is sporogony. So what happens? The nucleus of the oocyst will first divide by meiosis and then by the process of mitosis several times, and it develops to what is known as a fairly outlined cell called as sporoblast. Okay, so these sporoblasts, then the cytoplasm forms spindle-shaped haploid cells from these sporoblasts, which is called as sporozoites. Okay, a group having thousands of sporozoites will arrange around the vacuoles, and this phase of asexual multiplication, in which sporozoites are formed, is called as the sporogony. Okay, then when the oocyst will burst and the sporozoites are released into the hemolymph of the mosquito, from where they will reach the salivary glands and enter the duct of the hypopharynx. So this is where they will lie, and these sporozoites will infect a human host when the mosquito bites, and the life cycle is repeated again. So this is the life cycle of happening in the mosquito, that is the sexual cycle. So this completes the life cycle of when, and it has reached the sporozoid stage of the plasmodium. Okay, so this is about the life cycle of plasmodium. At the pathogenesis, the manifestations of this malarial illness, they are basically caused by the infection of the red blood cells by the asexual forms of this malarial parasite, and involves and the involvement of red cells makes malaria a potentially multi-system disease because it involves the RBCs. So all types of malaria manifest with common symptoms which will include fever, and some patients may progress to severe malaria, and severe malaria is often seen in cases with that of Plasmodium falciparum because that is the one species which causes most severe disease among all the Plasmodium species. So the clinical illness is caused by the erythrocytic stage of the parasite. So these newly developed merozoites are released by the lysis of infected erythrocytes, and along with this merozoites, red cell membrane products like hemozoin pigment and other toxic factors like GPI, that is glycosyl phosphatidyl inositol, are also released to the blood. Okay, so this, especially the GPI, and activate. So this GPI, what they do in once they are in the blood, it will activate the macrophages and other endothelial cells to secrete cytokines and inflammatory mediators like TNF, interferon gamma, interleukin 1, 6, 8, and macrophage colony stimulating factor, and other superoxides as well as nitric oxide. So the release of all these cytokines and inflammatory mediators result in the systemic manifestations of malaria, like it will start demonstrating the symptoms or displaying the symptoms like headache, fever, and nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, tiredness, and pain in the joints, muscles, thrombocytopenia, and many other symptoms. So further, what happens? The plasmodial DNA is also highly pro-inflammatory that can induce cytokinemia, and also it can result in fever. So this plasmodial DNA is presented by hemazoin to interact intracellularly with toll-like receptors 9, and this will lead to the pro-inflammatory cytokines to further induce COX-2 upregulating prostaglandins. So once these prostaglandins are upregulated, it will result in higher temperature resulting in fever. So that is about the pathogenesis. So what happens in case of severe malaria? The infection of the red cells by malarial parasites results in progressive and dramatic structural biochemical modifications that can worsen the situation. So several pathophysiological factors like malarial toxin, inflammatory response, cytoadherence, then altered deformability, dysfunction, and thrombostasis have all been found to be involved in severe malaria. So all these phenomena are more profound and they are widespread in the species that is Plasmodium falciparum. So as a result, except for severe anemia, the complications like cerebral malaria, hypoglycemia, and respiratory distress are all commonly seen in Plasmodium falciparum infections. So the most characteristic symptom of malaria is fever. When we look at the common malaria as well, the symptoms include high fever, headache, muscle pain, bloody stool, convulsions, and severe malaria involves high fever, then impaired consciousness, prostration, multiple convulsions, difficulty in breathing, bloody stools, clinical jaundice, and it can also be fatal if there is no treatment. So, if the disease progresses further, some patients can develop what is referred to as malaria paroxysm. So, this malaria paroxysm, it is comprising of three successive stages. So what happens in the first stage, which is referred to as the cold stage, that will last for 15 to 60 minutes. It is characterized by shivering and feeling of cold. So the next stage is the hot stage, that will last for 2 to 6 hours, in which there is fever, and the fever can sometimes reach up to 41 degree centigrade. And there is drying of skin and associated with headache, nausea, and also vomiting. And finally, there is the sweating stage, during which the fever drops rapidly and the patient starts to sweat. So these stages happen together, and that's why it is referred to as malaria. So coming to the diagnosis, there are many methods in the diagnosis. So the first one is the microscopic detection. So these malarial parasites are stained by Giemsa stain with thick continuous smears of the blood. So the blood smears are more difficult to interpret. Thick blood smears are more difficult to interpret than the thin ones, but they are much more sensitive because more amount of blood is examined. Whereas thin smears, in which parasites are seen within the erythrocytes, they are used to determine the species of the Plasmodium. So the presence of diagnostic forms can vary markedly with the stage of the life cycle. There are also other diagnostic tests that are available. So these new diagnostic tests include rapid antigen capture, dipstick test, and also fluorescent microscopy to detect the parasites. The other molecular methods that are available include PCR and DNA or RNA probing techniques. So these molecular methods are basically used in epidemiologic studies and also immunization trials, and it is very rarely to be used in the diagnosis of individual patients. So especially these molecular methods. So coming to the epidemiology, as we discussed, these malarial parasites are transmitted primarily by the bite of a female Anopheles mosquito. So these mosquitoes feed at night and their breeding sites are primarily in the rural areas where there is more of stagnation of water, which is the main reason for these mosquitoes to breed. So the greatest risk of malaria is therefore it is from dusk to dawn, especially which is very high in the rural. So looking at the prophylactic measures, it initially the first thing that is there in the prophylactic measures is the prevention of the mosquito vector. So it is important to avoid contact with the mosquito by wearing protective clothing and using insect repellents that contain DEET, and also staying in screened areas and by sleeping under bed nets. So the control among populations is difficult because among populations it has to be uh, a combined effort that can lead to the control, and it can be the transmission of the malaria can be avoided, or it requires the presence of three factors. So if these three factors are avoided, then it can result in the prevention of this transmission. So what are these factors? The malaria infected humans that they which carry who carries the gametocytes that are infective to mosquitoes, and Anopheles mosquito that live long enough for the malarial parasites to develop within them to the infector sporozoid stage, and infected mosquitoes that bite non-infected humans. So malaria control can be applied at each of these points and by treating human malaria infections, and hence thereby reducing the number of infected humans that mosquitoes feed on by eliminating or reducing the number of Anopheles mosquitoes. So looking at the treatment, malaria is treated with prescription drugs to kill the parasite. So the type of drugs and the length of the treatment will vary based on certain conditions, like which type of the malarial parasite has infected based on that, and the severity of the symptoms based on the age of the patient, and if, especially in females, whether the patient is pregnant or not. So when we look at the chemotherapy, what are the medicines that are available? The first one is artemisinin based combination therapies, ACTs. So some of the different types of ACTs include artemether, lumefantrine, and artesunate amodiaquine. So these are some of the ACTs that are available for the treatment of malaria, and chloroquine phosphate. So as you might be seeing that even for now for COVID-19 also, they are like some were preferring to give anti-malarial in some parts of the world. They were preferring to give anti-malarial drugs. Okay. So this chloroquine, it is the preferred treatment for any parasite that is sensitive to the drug. But in many parts of the world, the parasites that cause malaria are resistant to this chloroquine, and uh, right now the drug is no longer an effective treatment. So other common anti-malarial drugs include combination of this malarone, then quinine sulfate, mefloquine, primaquine phosphate. So these are some of the other anti-malarial. So with this, we come to the end of this lecture, malaria. Every year, 25th of April is observed as World Malaria Day. And this year, that is 2020, the theme of World Malaria Day was Zero Malaria Starts With Me. So which says that everybody or each individual should be aware of the disease so as to help in controlling the disease in spreading among the populations. Thank you. If you have any queries, you can post it in the course chat, or if you have any doubts, you can post it there and we can discuss about the same.